For those who don't know me, my name is Judith Brown Dianis, and I am the Executive Director of the National Office of Advancement Project. And I am so excited to be here. I want to thank everyone at the Leadership Conference for having this discussion. To my good friend Vanita, love you and love what you're doing. I'm honored to be here to have this conversation with one of my heroes, Desmond Meade. Desmond Meade heads up the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition that did something really big this election cycle. They actually got rid of a law that was passed right after Reconstruction to disenfranchise newly freed black folk in the state of Florida. I'm excited because he also knows, he and his wife know that I consider myself a ride or die for them. So I'm happy to be here. So I want to get into this conversation with him because for those who don't know, Amendment 4, probably everybody in this room knows. Why don't you tell just what Amendment 4 exactly is?
Wow, that's a great question, Judy, because it is just so much more than what I can talk about, you know, because it is so deep. You know, on its surface, I can say that Amendment 4 was a constitutional amendment that restored voting rights back to individuals with felony convictions. And
how many people is that?
That's 1.4 million people who have served their time. But that's on its surface,
yeah,
you know, and I know that
get into the deepness. Yeah, we gonna get into that.
No, because I remember Advancement Project has really been involved in an effort over the years because we knew that the explicit right to vote was not in the Constitution of the United States, and we really wanted to get that in there. And one of the strategies was going state by state and really making that happen, right? Well, what Amendment 4 just actually did was actually created a constitutional right to vote for people with felony convictions. And that is huge. And I think that that's something that needs to be really lifted up.
So, so Desmond, let's start with this question, because in looking at Amendment 4, and not just Amendment 4, but the work that led up to it. So we met, Advancement Project was one of the original groups in the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, started in 2003. We met about 2006 when you came on board. And I would say that the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition took a huge pivot when you came into leadership because it was personal.
Yes.
Why was it personal for you?
Well, it was personal because I am a returning citizen. I've and I'm not ashamed to say it now, but I mean, because of drug addiction, I got in a lot of trouble, and I was in and out of jails and eventually prison. Eventually, my addiction brought me to railroad tracks and had me standing there waiting on the train to come so I can jump in front of it. But thank God he had other plans for me, right? And I crossed those tracks and checked myself into treatment. And after I got out of that, I moved into a homeless shelter. While there, I enrolled in school. And right after I enrolled in school, part of this experience that I had in treatment was that in order for me to maintain my sobriety, I had to get engaged in service. I had to give back. And so I dedicated my life to giving back. And in doing so, that's when I was introduced to Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. So my engagement with the organization was purely personal, And so when Governor Scott came in and undid the policies and made it worse, everybody else could go home, but I couldn't, because I still could not vote. And so I think it was an experience. I think it was fitting to have people who are directly impacted in those leadership positions, because there's a certain level of tenacity that can only be there when you're directly impacted. So
2006 you start FRRC. I remember being in a meeting in Orlando in 2010. Fair districts had passed, and we were all getting together to talk about what was next in Florida. And I remember you standing up and saying that it's time for us to get rid of this provision in the Constitution. And there were so many naysayers in the room. There were people who were, funding collaborative people to progressive organizations who were saying no. And who were saying, it's not time yet. It's not time. Let's wait. We got an election coming up. It's going to be about this candidate. It's going to be. So I remember that, and I remember standing up and being like, y'all are wrong. Y'all are wrong. 69% of the people believe in this. How'd you bring them along?
That's a great question. It was this phrase, I think it was from Field of Dreams, that said, build it and they will come. There were so many people who did not believe it, and I kind of understood, because number one, they didn't have the vision. Number two, they were not directly impacted, right? And number three, that they were used to a system that says that only certain type of people can lead certain efforts, And so I knew what God put in my heart to do, and so I kept it moving. And, we have allies along the way, like Advancement Project, never left. Folks that stood in the paint, and more than, and I got to give a shout out, because so many times, the only time we give black women credit is when we talk about voting, right? But I could tell you right now that throughout my journey, from my wife, from my mother-in-law, from my sister, it's always been a black woman that has helped hold me up. In times when I couldn't stand on my own, they were there. And they stepped up in major ways, and I know if it wasn't for my sisters and for the love of my life, that I couldn't have made it. And so I know that God gave me the helpmate. He gave me the people that was in place to help push on in spite of everyone saying that you're crazy, it's not going to happen. They didn't understand what faith really was.
And we have tissues because we're both criers. He's like the one movement person that makes me cry every time. So he knows that, and he, does it well. So not crying yet. Yeah. Not get me yet. So But these naysayers, so let's talk about the process, right? Because the process was, first of all, in Florida, you have to have over 60% of the people have to vote to approve a constitutional amendment. You had to get petitions signed. And I remember you were getting petitions signed when wasn't nobody trying to give y'all no money. And, you know, you were doing it out the back of cars. Big Mama, who's Sheena's mother, was at it in the back of her car. I mean, this was grassroots from the beginning when no one believed. Just talk a little bit about that process of like that petition collection and how y'all did it. And then eventually people came to the party and helped, right?
Yeah.
But before they came to the party, what was it like?
And you know, let me tell you, there was a time when, you know, there was some resentment. You know, when you were looking out, you know, pleading, you know, when I would come up to D.C., I would spend my student loans just cold calling on folks, just pleading and begging folks to understand how important this issue was and how transformative it was. But and even though it seemed like no one wanted to pay attention, that there was some resentment there. But I understood through my even spiritual relationship with my higher power, who I choose to call God, that sometimes he takes you through some things. So even when he took me through me being homeless and being hooked on drugs and about to kill myself and all that, I went through that because he was preparing me for greater work, to be of greater service. And so what I started to realize was that he was doing the same thing with this campaign. You know, because if the people didn't abandon me, I wouldn't have gotten the experience that I've gotten. If they would have came when I first called, we would not have had we would not have been successful, because it was the organic nature of this campaign that laid the foundation for us to be successful. And it allowed us the space to not find some brilliant political strategy, you know, to win a campaign, but to go back to the simplest of things. When you talk about the author or the man who talked about bending an arc towards justice, that was the same gentleman that talked about that hate can't drive out hate, right? That fear can't drive out fear. It took love to drive that out. And so it allowed us an opportunity, because all of the experts didn't think we were going to win. It allowed this campaign to be truly led by a higher power. And because it was led by a higher power, at the core of that was about love. Right? And that broke down racial barriers. It broke down partisan lines. It broke down, I mean, come on, when you think about it, you have voting, you have felons, and you have Florida. Those are three volatile subjects.
Who would have thought, right?
And
like,
you put that all together, right? You put that all together.
That sounds like a loser.
Of course, it is a loser, right? But what happens when you put that all together in an environment as toxic as we live in today, but yet not one major opposition against it? Then he got over 5.1 million votes, which I tell people that those 5.1 million votes was not votes based on fear or votes based on hate, but over 5.1 million votes based on love, forgiveness, and redemption, right? And when you look and you see that those votes was over 1 million more than any candidate got on that ballot. And that when you looked at the 67 counties in Florida, you've seen that we got the majority of votes in 62 out of 67, right? This is the same toxic issue, but yet we had our Jewish brothers and sisters. We had our Islamic brothers and sisters. We had our conservative Christians. We had our AMEs that was representing, right? And you had even our Latino evangelicals. How could you get such a hodgepodge of people singing the same chorus of love?
That's right. That's right.
That's amazing. And I believe that what happened on November 6th is something special enough for this entire country to take pause and to really analyze. Because I believe that somewhere in that victory is the secret sauce to how we move major issues in this country.
Right, that's right. That's right. So, I want to move to November 6th. So the days leading up to the election, so Advancement Project, we usually are on the ground doing our little lawyer thing and all that. And I was like, I'm not doing that this time. I'm knocking on doors. And I took Jesse Williams, our board member, the activist, with me. We were in South Florida, knocking on doors. And then I came up to Orlando, actually came on the Let My People Vote bus, slept on that bus. And I would say for me, like, what was important for me to do in that moment, while so many of my colleagues were in Georgia doing really important work, for me it was important because I had seen this journey, and that I had seen the work that you and your family and a coalition of groups had done. And I also know that from prior years of doing litigation in Florida, that this was one of those issues that we had to take care of. And so as I was knocking on doors, and I've done canvassing years ago in Florida, but again, like the same thing of knocking on doors. I asked Sheena Roll, who was helping them with the campaign, I said, send me to the hood of the hood of the hood. I'm not scared, they're my people. And so I was knocking on doors, and so many of those people were people who could not vote, and who just came like the world. It was time for him to show us. Going through some change and made. Just give him time to grow up. They knew about Amendment 4, though, and they were excited about the potential of Amendment 4. And they understood that January was going to come, and for them, some semblance of freedom was finally going to come. And so tell me about, like, that moment. So I was there for the victory party, and we were in a ballroom, and I remember, like, that was a crying moment. Tell me about that moment when they called it.
You said a lot just then. So much is just running through my mind now. Yesterday, I revealed for the first time something that I never told anyone. Not even my wife, believe it or not. And I tell my wife everything, because she's my best friend as well. But I had carried a burden for quite a long time during this campaign, because as a person of color, I felt extra stress or tension, knowing that if we did not succeed, that would be a reason for folks to say, that's why we don't let people of color lead major fights. And so that was an extra burden that I had to carry, because I knew that I wasn't just talking about liberating 1.4 and creating a more inclusive democracy, but also for the skillful and extremely competent men and women of color that was out there that was not given that opportunity to lead major campaigns or to be funded properly, that there was that extra burden there to win that. And so on that night, when those final numbers came, that was a huge burden that was lifted off of me. But I tell people, when you talk about when you canvass the community, and this is, like I said, this is no kind of slight to any of our great folks that was running. But I told people, and you heard me at the church when I told people that the most important person on that ballot, name wasn't on that ballot, but Pookie was on that ballot. Shaniqua was on that ballot. Ray was on, Desmond was on that ballot. When my wife went to go vote on that ballot, the most important thing for her was liberating her husband. the giving a husband the right to vote. And that came across that night. That came across that. We're talking about igniting or reinstilling hope in over 1.4 million people in Florida. And there's nothing more powerful than hope, you know. And so I believe that, you know, when that ticker went down and you seen us all jumping and tearing down the stage, it seemed like that was a release. That was a release of 150 years of oppression. That was a release of years of being told that we weren't good enough, that we had other fights to fight instead of our fight. That was a relief to know that, listen, a person of color can be strategic enough to maneuver a campaign in treacherous waters and come out of there unscathed.
So, so it was one of the most beautiful moments of my career to be there. And I remember there was a sister who was videotaping. She was doing Facebook Live, and she was crying and saying, "I can vote, I can vote." And Desmond brought all of the members of FRC, the returning citizens, to the stage because he always centered the people who were impacted. And that is so important. And so, I mean, from Advancement Project, like the work that we do is all about impacted people leading their own movements. And the importance of that because of the genius in impacted people and not discounting that. And so I want to like also just like lift up the beauty of the movement because of impacted people being at the forefront. And just want to ask you, I've got two more questions for you, I think. One is, so what's your, you know, we got a room full of like folks from national organizations, some local organizations. What's your lesson learned about impacted people leading their own movements? What advice do you want to give the room? The proof is in the pudding.
Listen, let's be real. You know, especially in Florida, we over years and years we haven't much to celebrate in Florida. But here it was at one time. And matter of fact, no, let me change that because there were two major ballot initiatives that was won on November 6th, right? And both of them was led by people of color who was directly impacted. Norris Henderson in Louisiana, he led vote to in Amendment number 2 that got rid of this Jim Crow law that allowed people to be convicted without having a unanimous jury, which was amazing. And then, of course, Amendment 4 that now established voting rights for over 1.4 million folks and beyond, right? And I think the proof is in the pudding. You know, when you let people who are closest to the pain, you give them the space not only to lead, but you give them the space to fail. Let me back that up again. You give them the space to fail. Because the difference between a Harold Miner and a Michael Jordan was Michael Jordan was allowed to play through his mistakes. Harold Miner kept having to look over his shoulder and never materialized into the great player that he could have been. Give us room to fail like everybody else. Give us the support financially like everybody else. And like I tell people, listen, I've seen where people who have historically lost get funded in droves. So listen, we're on, like in the words of one of our great DJs in Florida, FRC, our new theme song is all we do is win, win, win no matter what. Fund that. Fund that. Fund winners. And we're giving you that opportunity to do so.
So, so that folks know this work was not just about the amendment, right? So we did a report called Democracy Disappeared, released early before the election, that showed the impact of disenfranchisement on communities of color and how in every neighborhood where there are high concentrations of people who could not vote, you got all the things you would expect: high poverty rates, low education attainment, high unemployment. And so we know that this is important. And so Amendment 4 wasn't just about getting the vote, right? It was about building power. This was not transactional. This was movement building. So talk about what's next.
That's a great question. You always asking great questions. But part of that too is like, a lot of people focused on the 1.4, but what we knew is that there was an additional 2.4 million people who was registered, where a lot of those individuals were related to people who couldn't vote. And so Amendment 4 was not only just about liberating or re-enfranchising the 1.4, but to also re-engage. And so when you talk about what's next is that we want to embrace the spirit that got us to win by making sure that we continue to not do business as usual, right? So many folks right now rushing out there trying to find felons to register and all that, Listen, we register folks. You can register 1 million people, and if only 10% of them show up, we got a problem. Right, and so we know that as we're moving forward into 2019, our goal is to change the way we approach even registration, knowing that we have to layer other things on top of that to increase the likelihood of people being civically engaged and in tune and knowledgeable about the issues and being able to vote. Right, and so that's what our what's next is. How do we build out, FRC has 12 chapters throughout the state of Florida, how do we build those chapters out, engage in peer-to-peer registration and engagement? How do we work with our allies and our partners, and making sure that not just the 1.4, but it's way more than 1.4 million that's not registered in Florida, and they need to be engaged in a way, because we cannot continue to be ignoring people and then scratch our head wondering why they don't come out to vote. Right? And so our job and our commitment is to reaching out to the folks who have been neglected, who have been marginalized, and engage them and empower them in such a way, because when that happens, then we see the beauty of democracy.
So Desmond, I want to thank you for allowing
one person
me
got it.
To be
One person got it. I don't think the rest of you all got it, but that lady over there in the yellow, she got it.
Look, she's been getting the whole thing, though. She's been getting the whole thing the whole time. So I just want to thank you for allowing me to be a very small part of a major part of history that was made in this country. We all should be thanking you for correcting the wrongs of the past, for giving our people another chance, and to shifting democracy. So I want to thank you, and thanks everybody for your time.
So I just want to thank, because I know there's many of you all out there, folks representing different organizations that have played some role or another in our victory, and so you need to continue standing and give yourselves a round of applause, because it truly was a collective effort. It truly was. So thank you all so much.
All right, folks, back to that Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. Now, a word from one of our Roland Martin Unfiltered partners. You've heard me say it before, and I will say it again. Write down this website, marijuanastock.org. That's marijuanastock.org. I'm going to tell you why it matters. Legal marijuana has grown to become a $9 billion industry in roughly 6 years. Forbes magazine predicts the market will continue to grow to nearly $50 billion in the next 10 years. So whether you like it or not, legal marijuana is a growing industry, and it is only going to get bigger. Now, if you're an investor, you get it. You look for business models that are easy to understand in industries that are trending up. Our friends at Transatlantic Real Estate made their business very simple. They buy land that supports legal marijuana operations and lease it to high-paying tenants. So you are investing in the landlord of a licensed marijuana farm. Stop working so hard for your money. Let your money start working for you by investing in the legal cannabis industry. You can invest as little as $300 up to $10,000. But you can't wait. This crowdfunding opportunity is only available for a few more days. They say that you either make things happen, watch things happen, or sit around wondering what happened. Don't be the person watching and wondering. Don't let another investment boom get away from you. It's time to make something happen for you, your finances, and your family. And don't forget my pro tip. To be included, you must complete and confirm your application. And be sure to complete the process. Go to marijuanastock.org. That's marijuanastock.org. Get in the game, folks. Do it now before time runs out. Now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Because guess what? We come back live January 3rd. The blackest show on all of digital, cable, and broadcast. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Hello. Y'all want some of this? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications. There's only one show out here, folks, in the digital world that's focused on you. Because here's the piece. I ain't afraid of Fox News. Come back live January 3rd. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.